June 3rd of 2016, the day Muhammad Ali died. During the first few months of 1942, the United States was sending millions of men and thousands of planes to the United Kingdom to actively participate in World War II. Amidst. In the Buchenwald concentration camp, the first Nazi experiments on humans with typhus began. In New York, a fire destroyed the enormous French transatlantic liner Normandy. On the other hand, Mahatma Gandhi began a hunger strike to protest his detention. In Mexico, the Nazis sank the oil tanker Potrero del Llano. And because of that, the Mexicans entered the war on the side of the Allies. And amidst all that global chaos, Cassius Marcellus Clay was born, who would years later become the greatest boxer in history. Before we start with his life, his death, and all his achievements, I kindly ask you to please leave a like if you haven't done so yet, turn on notifications, and leave a comment here suggesting possible topics for new videos. Let's begin. This little one was born on January 17th, 1942 in Louisville, Kentucky, United States. He was the son of Cassius Marcellus Clay, who was an artist who made a living painting portraits and religious representations. When he was sober, he was fun and always made himself seen, but when he drank he became aggressive, and more than once the woman of the house paid the consequences. His mother, Odessa O'Grady, worked for some time as a domestic worker to help support her young children. Little Clay had one sister and 4 brothers. Along with his family, he lived in a middle-class neighborhood that at that time was known as a black neighborhood. The divisions were not made by them but by the racial segregation that flooded the streets of the United States. The future 3-time world champion shared his room with his younger brother, Rudolph. Both boys, Cassius and Rudy Clay, were raised according to Baptist precepts. Unfortunately, they were born in a time when skin color division was normal, something that Cassius could not stand from his early years. To put it in context, the city where the champion was born was the cradle of bourbon. The economy of Louisville had been diminished by prohibition laws, but by that year, the hard economic times were just a thing of the past. Everything had recovered. In this way, the wealthy people began to walk its streets again, and at that time the majority were wealthy white racists. High society went shopping. Bars and restaurants were strictly reserved for whites. Blacks could not try on the clothes they were going to buy, nor could they sit in these bars. They traveled in the back of trains and buses, always under the sign that read colored. It is accurate to remember what the champion said about that time. My mom Odessa had taken me downtown for a walk. I was thirsty and we went into a 10-cent store. My mom asked the employee, who was white, for a glass of water for me, and the woman told her that if she served me the water, she would lose her job. I never forgot that situation. Another statement that Ali made during his championship years was the following. When I was a child, I didn't understand what was happening. Jesus was white, the angels were white, Tarzan the king of the jungle was white, my United States was white. I wanted to have a shotgun and shoot at the sky to be heard. Until I was 18, I didn't know what was happening. I was already a boxer and I think I became one for that reason, so that someone would know that I was in the world. He studied and lived his childhood in the best way he could, always accompanied by his brother. But when did his love for boxing appear? What happened in his life to make that turn at 12 years old? At that time he had an incredible love for his Schwinn brand bicycle painted a furious red, but someone showed up one day while he was pedaling and stole it. He chased after him but couldn't catch up. With tears in his eyes, little Clay found a police officer and asked him to catch the person who had taken his bike to hit him. Out of his little mouth came, "I want to give him a beating." The policeman was Joseph Elsby Martin, a 38-year-old white man. He advised him to throw a few punches at the punching bag before hitting someone to vent his anger. Later, Joey would become his personal trainer, who would become his mentor and the first person to see the terrible potential the boy had. There would be the transformation of Cassius. He would get up at 5 in the morning to run in Chickasaw Park, the only public garden authorized for blacks. He measured the speed of his sprints against the buses that were on the street. The machine had turned on. His exhaustive training took him to the Tomorrow's Champions program, where he won against Ronnie O'Keefe by points. The months passed, and Cassius alternated his training with Martin and Fred Stoner, who ended up accompanying him in his amateur career. Stoner taught him how to move in the ring, which would later become his signature move. By that time, Clay was boasting a lot. He even went as far as challenging bigger boxers. But amidst all the arrogance, there was a dose of humor that made everyone in the gym smile. The titles wouldn't take long to come. In 1956, at 14 years old, he won the Golden Globes Championship for rookies in the state of Kentucky. That would be the first of his 5 Golden Gloves. But he was missing something that he wanted for the neighborhood to know him better. The following year, he made his first appearance in the newspaper after defeating Donnie Hall by technical knockout. In 1959, he took the Intercities Golden Globes Championship against Tony Madigan in the light heavyweight category, and by April, he was crowned as the national champion of the Amateur Athletic Union in the same category. But what had given him so much success in just a few years of training? According to his first coach, Joe Martin, Clay had incredible speed. He had unusual movements in the ring achieved thanks to the intensity of his training. He amassed 36 consecutive victories. He was unbeatable. Until May 1st came along, and with it 3 unbearable rounds led by the sailor Amos Johnson, who beat him in the Pan American Games classification. At 18 years old, he graduated from Central High School, and in boxing he was already a multiple national champion and a collector of Golden Gloves. Cassius Clay secured a place in the Rome Olympics in 1960, but there was a major obstacle he had to face: the fear of flying. The young boxer was determined not to get on the plane and miss the Olympics. He didn't care. He even tried to convince the organizers to let him travel by boat, but he couldn't. Joe Martin talked to him for several hours, calmed him down, and ended up convincing him. He had to go to Rome. He had to go for the medal, and that's what happened. From the moment Clay arrived in Rome, his charisma stood out from the rest. He became popular among the athletes due to his style and personality. They even started calling him the mayor of the Olympic Village. In Italian lands, he started by knocking out, danced in the ring for the next fight, and in the semi-final he had a great performance, leading him to the final where at first it was a very even fight. To stand out, he had to show what he knew how to do best: dance and win. With fast punches and an impressive display of attack, Clay won the gold medal at just 18 years old. Clay recalled his Olympic victory years later and said, "I didn't take off that medal for 48 hours. I even took it to bed. I didn't sleep too well because I had to sleep on my back so the medal wouldn't cut me. But I didn't care. I was an Olympic champion." Thus, Clay's amateur stage evolved towards professionalism. He was more than ready for everything that was coming. With his arrival at the house, the Louisville sponsoring group was the one who supported him in his professional career. He made his professional debut on October 29, 1960 against Tony Honsiger, a more experienced policeman and 10 years older. 6 rounds and a unanimous decision gave the victory to Clay. During those years he wanted to train as if he were an elite boxer. With the gold medal hanging from his neck, Angelo Dandi was the chosen one, among many coaches willing to take the bet of the future world champion. All this was happening while the Ku Klux Klan continued to disappear and kill people of color. For those who want to understand the context of the Ku Klux Klan, I invite you to watch the video that is on this channel and is called "The Day the Ku Klux Klan Was Born." With a new challenge turned into a dream, Clay traveled to Miami to start his training. In 1961, he already had 5 consecutive knockout victories and a new opponent, Duke Savenduck, was approaching. But if there was something that the future Muhammad Ali stood out for, it was the speed of his words and the damage they did to his opponent's psyche. He learned this technique from the professional wrestler Gorgeous George. The confidence with which he lived the eve of the fights infected Clay, who ended up attracted to this provocative style. On July 22nd of that year, and in front of the entire country's television, Clay beat Alonzo Johnson and added his 10th consecutive victory, 7 by knockout. On February 10th of 1962, he had an appointment with another of his dreams, the Madison Square Garden. He had to fight in New York against Sonny Banks. The businessmen were rubbing their hands together. From that moment on, Clay would be seen on the televisions of all Americans, in all his fights. The fight with Banks was not easy. He was the first to knock him down to the canvas in the first round, however. He got up and dominated the rest of the confrontation. The curious thing about the fight was that before stepping into the ring, he had thrown a prediction into the air. He would come out victorious in only 4 rounds. Clay surprised everyone, even his coach, who was impressed by his fighter's recovery. He was 20 years old with 15 victories. He was determined to take on the world. On November 15, 1962, he faced the 47-year-old veteran Archie Moore in Los Angeles, California. They knew each other. Moore had trained him for a brief period of time before his current coach. The duo hadn't worked because Clay wasn't interested in following anyone's orders. Clay won again. After the forecasts, the ego, and the poems he recited before the fights, he got another nickname, the Louisville Lip. Part of the press loved him and the other part hated him. The favorable point for him was that the provocations towards his opponents gave him the psychological advantage that he knew how to handle very well. According to Angelo Dundee, Clay was a scholar of his opponents and did not make predictions without previously analyzing them. He reached 18 undefeated fights. A lot of talent, but in much of boxing he was not considered due to his unorthodox way of fighting. As he is currently known to the world, his guard was different from others, with lax or extended arms, always moving his shoulders and waist to avoid punches. The agility of his feet and hands, coupled with the speed of his punches, made him lethal. He didn't seem like a heavyweight. On June 18, 1963, he had to fight professionally for the first time outside the United States. The Englishman Henry Cooper was waiting for him at Wembley Stadium. By this point in his career, he and his team were already thinking about the belt fight, but they had to go through other people's gloves first. Before stepping into the ring, he said they would win 5 rounds. Otherwise, he promised he wouldn't return to the United States for 30 days. Clay drove the crowd wild when he showed up to the fight wearing a crown on his head. As he was about to reach the end of the 4th round, Clay received a powerful hook that knocked him down for the 2nd time in his professional career. He managed to get up, and in the seconds left to start the 5th round, Angelo Dundee gave him smelling salts, which many people didn't like, and took the opportunity to inform the referee that his pupil's glove had been cut. Dundee's intervention would lead to an endless controversy over whether the cut had been caused by him with a razor blade. In theory, it was also that Clay could rest a little more. Upon resuming with his new glove, Clay unleashed everything he had against Cooper. The referee stopped the fight and awarded him the victory by technical knockout. He was now able to fight for the title, and that's what he did. The Cassius Clay vs. Sonny Liston fight took place in Miami Beach. In theory, Liston had everything in his favor, as he had the titles of the World Boxing Association, the New York Athletic Commission, and the newly founded World Boxing Council around his waist. Until that moment, he was the most feared fighter in the world. Clay started the fight outside the ring using what he liked the most, provocation. He called the world champion a horrible bear and brought a bear trap to his house. As usual, he predicted he would win in the 8th round, and he also went and read him a poem. Clay comes out to face Liston, and Liston backs off. If Liston takes one more step, they'll end up in the front seat. In this fight, he said his typical phrase, "I'll float like a butterfly and sting like a bee." Clay beat Liston and was crowned world champion. He started dancing in the ring, celebrating and shouting things at the people. That's where Ali's most famous photo comes from. The curious thing is that over time he made more from the sale of the gloves used in that fight, $836,000, than from the earnings of the fight itself, which were $630,000. A new birth was approaching. Double world champion. Double birth. On March 6, 1964, Cassius converted to the religion of Islam and changed his name to Cassius X, and days later he changed it again to the well-known Muhammad Ali, arguing that the first was a slave name. That name meant the beloved of God, which he chose according to his words, because Clay was the slave surname that he had not chosen. His exact words were, Cassius Clay is the name of a slave. I didn't choose it. I didn't want it. I am Muhammad Ali, a free man. Ali married his first wife, Sonji Roy, in 1964, but they divorced after a year when she refused to adopt the dress and customs of the women of the Nation of Islam. The rematch against Liston was on strange ground. There were voices saying that the mafia was involved in the ropes, just like the Muslims and other powers that ended the fight in an unconventional way. There were problems with the timer and the referee. Both had done the count differently and ended up giving the victory to Lee. And so opponents kept appearing, words, phrases, knockouts, and a story that fed itself. On November 22, 1965, Lee faced Floyd Patterson. He was coming from an unattainable battle with the media for his controversial statements against Christianity, and above all, to support racial integration. His opponent was Christian and called Ali by his old name and added that he would return the world title to the United States. Ali didn't hold back and mocked him, calling him Uncle Tom. Ali won, but the cameras took the attention away from his words during the fight. Every time he landed a punch, he would say, "What's my name, fool?" By the time of his third title defense against George Uvallo, Ali defended his belt, but before the fight ended, Uvallo shook the champion's body, bringing him to the brink of his first knockout. While Muhammad Ali was training for fierce battles, on the streets he was rubbing shoulders with the most important personalities in the fight for African American rights. Among them were Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks. The boxer was another indispensable element in this cause. He fought again against Henry Cooper on May 21, 1966 in England. Almost 50,000 spectators attended the fight. Ali caused him a cut on the upper arch of his left eye and in this way won once again. That same year, Ali defended his title against Brian London. Then came Carl Mildenberger and an important fact. This was the first sports event broadcasted via satellite and in color. Later, he beat Cleveland Williams, showing off the dance that would later be called the Ali Shuffle. In 1967 New Year, New Life, Ali married his second wife, Belinda Boyd, who was 17 years old, and they had 4 children together. New Life, New Defense, Ernie Terrell. The league won by unanimous decision, becoming for the second time the undisputed heavyweight champion. He returned to Madison Square Garden to fight against Zora Foley. With 7 rounds, he kept his title safe. But something was occurring beyond the ropes. In April 1967, the United States was recruiting people for the army. But he refused to serve on the grounds that he was a practicing Muslim minister with religious beliefs that prevented him from fighting. He was arrested for committing a felony and almost immediately stripped of his world title and boxing license. He was found guilty of violating selective service laws and sentenced to 5 years in prison in June of 1967, but remained free while appealing his conviction. In this way, he would not fight again for 3.5 years. Up to that point, he had a record of 29 wins with no losses, 22 of them by knockout. But what did Ali do during all that time? Did he go to train at the North Pole? Did he go to punch calves in a refrigerator? Well, actually no. The champion, far from the ropes, approached the theater and acted for a brief period of time in the Broadway musical called Back White. Incredible, but real. In the year 1970, Senator Leroy Johnson from the state of Georgia helped Muhammad Ali to be able to fight again. He faced Jerry Quarry on October 26th. The victory was not a surprise. Everyone was going for the punches of the former champion. What did catch attention was his physical condition, which seemed the same as always. On December 7th of 1970, an Argentine appeared in the title fight, Ringo Bonavena. In Argentina, the fight had the highest rating peak of those years, 79.3. Everyone wanted to see Ringo as champion, but unfortunately he lost in the 15th round by technical knockout after falling 3 times in a row. The interesting thing about that fight was the build-up, because Ringo had managed to drive Ali crazy. Among the first clashes was the exchange. Ali called him a tired-footed cow, and the Argentine quickly replied, "Go to hell." There's a very interesting recording where Ali tries to scare Ringo with feints, but he in response gives him a feint, and the one who ends up scared is Ali. After this, everyone laughed. They wanted to tear each other's heads off, but everyone respected each other. In 1971, Ali faced Joey Frazier in what had been called the fight of the century. They went 14 rounds before Frazier knocked Ali down with a brutal left hook. Ali recovered quickly as always, but the judges gave it to Frazier, giving Ali his first professional defeat after 31 victories. And here's a story within the story. Frank Sinatra had no sympathy for the decisions and ideals of Muhammad Ali, the name change, the Vietnam War, and other country issues, and that way, it made it difficult for him to get a good seat at the fight. Frank Sinatra said he didn't want to miss seeing Joey Frazier take the title, so after touching some contacts, Life magazine accredited him as the official photographer for that day. And so he got what he wanted, but the magazine received in return the worst photos you could imagine. Beyond the defeat, Ali couldn't stay still. He won several fights in Switzerland, Tokyo, returned to New York, and when he won in Las Vegas, he took something more than the prize. Elvis Presley gave him a robe that he would later use in a fight. But he lost that fight, so he kept the robe and never used it again. On March 31st, 1973, he lost again, this time to Ken Norton. They wanted to stop the fight since Ali had a broken jaw, but they continued, and the split score gave him another loss. The battle of the century was held again, but this time it was quite deflated. Ali and Frazier faced off once more in the Philippines. Both men took a tremendous beating. However, Frazier's coach threw in the towel, giving the victory to Ali. Another legendary fight of Ali was against the heavyweight champion George Foreman. If the previous ones were the fights of the century, this was the fight of Olympus. Announced as the Rumble in the Jungle, the match was organized by promoter Don King and took place in Kinshasa, Zaire. In the betting, Ali was the underdog against the young and solid Foreman, but he silenced his critics with a masterful performance. He goaded Foreman into throwing wild punches before shaking his opponent with a knockout in the 8th round to claim the heavyweight title. A truly incredible fight. As if that wasn't enough, Ali became the first boxer to win the heavyweight championship 3 times. This was thanks to Leon Spinks, who first beat him and then Ali defeated him in the rematch. At the same time that Ali was married to Boyd, he was with Veronica Portia, who would become his 3rd wife in 1977. The couple had 2 daughters. One of them was Layla Ali, who followed in her father's footsteps and became a boxing champion. Portia and Ali divorced in 1986. After a brief retirement, Ali returned to the ring to face Larry Holmes in 1980, but was outmatched against the younger champion. After a final defeat in 1981 against Trevor Berwick, the great boxer retired from the sport at the age of 39. In 1984, Ali announced that he had Parkinson's, a degenerative neurological condition. As the disease progressed, he participated in many events and remained actively public. Ali underwent spinal stenosis surgery, a condition that caused narrowing of the spine, which limited his mobility and ability to communicate. The champion's final years were approaching. Already away from boxing, he approached love again, and in 1986 he married his 4th and last wife Yolanda, also known as Lonnie. They had known each other for many years, their mothers were good friends, and they raised their families on the same street. They remained together until death. Without the gloves, but with the calluses of a life full of intensity, Ali dedicated much of his last time to philanthropy. He supported the Special Olympics and various other organizations. One of the most intense images of the 90s was seeing him in 1996, lighting the Olympic cauldron at the Summer Olympics in Atlanta. Pure emotion. In 1998, he was chosen as a United Nations Peace Messenger for his work in developing countries. Years later, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the award for his efforts in public service. In 2005, he opened the Muhammad Ali Center in his hometown of Louisville and later said, "I am a common man who worked hard to develop the talent that was given to me." Many fans wanted to build a museum to recognize my achievements. I wanted more than a building to house my memories. I wanted a place that would inspire people to do the best they could in whatever they wanted to do and encourage them to be respectful of each other. His family cared for him in his final years. In 1975, he was interviewed where he specifically talked about his fear of death. "I'm not afraid of death," he said, "but I am afraid of not being prepared when my time comes." We are all imperfect, and that's why we won't go to heaven. The idea of going to hell, even though I'm doing my best to improve my soul, terrifies me. Life is just a test to see where we will be assigned, up or down. But I prefer hell to nothing. Thinking about nothing upsets me greatly. Ali died at the age of 74 on June 3rd, 2016 in Phoenix, Arizona, after being hospitalized for what was reportedly a respiratory problem. The legend had been battling Parkinson's and spinal stenosis, but could no longer continue the fight. In early 2015, the athlete battled pneumonia and was hospitalized for a severe urinary tract infection. Years before his death, Ali had planned his own memorial services. He said he wanted to be inclusive to all, a funeral where we give the opportunity to as many people who want to pay their respects to me. And so it was. The event lasted 3 days and hosted thousands and thousands of people. It occurred in his hometown of Louisville. It included a public arts festival, entertainment, and educational offerings to Ali, sponsored by the city, an Islamic prayer program, and a memorial service. There was even a funeral procession through Louisville as thousands of fans threw flowers at the hearse. Muhammad indicated that when his end came, he wanted us to use his life and death as a teaching moment for young people, for his country and for the world, said Looney, Ali's widow. The pallbearers included Will Smith, who had portrayed the champion in the 2001 biographical film, and former heavyweight champions Mike Tyson and Lennox Lewis. Ali was buried in the National Cemetery at Cape Hill in Louisville. He who was born a slave was reborn as a free man and changed the standards of the sport. He was able to end his days in peace and surrounded by his family. And that's the video about the death and also the life of Muhammad Ali. If you're interested, please leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment or suggestion for possible future videos. Thanks for joining me, Magnus Mephisto, for the day that. Check out these recommended videos to continue your marathon. Goodbye for now.